Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, April 14th, 2023. What are your chances of being audited? That's the title of an April 7th Wall Street Journal article by Josh Zumbrin. Now, here's some of the points made in that article. Danny Werfel, the new IRS commissioner, told reporters that the IRS will not come close to hitting or exceeding any historic average rate. For the 2019 tax year, there were 22.9 million individual tax returns reporting between $100,000 and $200,000 in income. Of those 22.9 million returns, 37,000 of them were audited. That works out to an audit rate of just 0.2%. Now that's down sharply from 128,000 audits, or 0.8%, out of 15 million returns in 2010. Over the 10-year period, the average rate was 0.45%, meaning the IRS could still have some wiggle room for audits without going beyond the historic average. Fewer than 2% of tax returns have adjusted gross incomes above $400,000. The problem, simply put, is that reported and actual income are different. Indeed, exempting taxpayers with reported income below a certain threshold can create incentives that widen the gap. An unscrupulous person who earned $500,000 might decide that it's better to hide a full $100,000 instead of just a few thousand, because they would then have the reported income of an ordinary person that the IRS is pledged not to pursue too hard. So why would the IRS ever audit a lower income taxpayer when auditing a wealthy taxpayer presumably yields more tax? Well, that's because from the IRS's perspective, not all audits require the same effort. It spends a little over 6 hours on average auditing a taxpayer reporting $25,000 to $200,000 in income, but almost 34 hours on one reporting $500,000 to $5 million in income. So audit efficiency is best measured by additional revenue per hour of work rather than the audit rate. The second most effective use is auditing households at the opposite end of the scale, low-income people who claim the Earned Income Tax Credit. That yields nearly $3,000 per hour. Now, little time spent by the IRS doesn't necessarily mean little time spent for a taxpayer. Now, I learned this the hard way a number of years ago when a mistake reporting a withdrawal from a health savings account triggered an automatic letter. This is something less than an audit and probably took the IRS mere minutes. But for me, it took dozens of hours plus hiring an accountant and a lot of stress. So to answer the original question, what are your odds of being audited? Well, the audit rate turns out not to be a good metric because audits aren't random. They are triggered by something unusual or a conspicuous mistake. In conclusion, it seems like all of D.C. is desperately trying to assure the American citizenry that they will not be subject to a time-consuming, stressful, and disruptive IRS audit. They realize that the biggest problem with the income payroll tax system is that everyone detests all the needless complexity and they detest the IRS. So D.C. has a problem. They know that people are already upset by what they consider the unfairness of the income payroll tax system. People have become more aware that it's not just the special interests that are sold tax benefits that increase the burden on the ordinary American, but it's the fact that their fellow Americans are not paying over $1 trillion per year in taxes that are legally owed. Now that's also increasing the income payroll tax burden on the rest of us. The evasion, not the special income tax benefits sold by Congress to special interest groups, is the reason given for increasing the number of IRS audits. They want to catch the freeloaders who are cheating. Now, unfortunately, the people who are evading their income tax don't check a box identifying themselves as tax evaders. To the contrary, they work hard to disguise their evasion. So, the IRS must conduct extensive and intrusive audits on everyone to have any hope of detecting the evaders. This means that most Americans who try to pay their federal taxes will find themselves being treated by the IRS auditors as if they were tax cheats. We'll all be guilty until we can prove ourselves innocent. Now, isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system and the IRS? When the FAIRtax is enacted, there will be no need to fear being audited by the IRS because there will be no more IRS. Under the FAIRtax, there will be no more tax returns. We'll pay our taxes when we make retail purchases of new goods and services. Now, there's going to be a vote on the FAIRtax in the House of Representatives. Speaker McCarthy and the other elites didn't want it, but it was forced on them. So, we now have the opportunity to force all members of the House to show where they stand. They can vote for the present income payroll tax system, or they can vote for the FAIRtax. They can support the corrupt income tax in the IRS, or they can vote to eliminate it. It can't be any simpler than that. They can hide the true cost of government, or they can pass the FAIRtax and show everyone the true cost of government on every retail receipt. And they can support the largest transfer of power from the government to the people, the FAIRtax, or they can vote against it. Now, if members think the FAIRtax needs to be changed, they can propose that change. Don't let them reject the entire bill because it has a flaw that can be easily addressed. So please stand with us and demand that your representatives support a much fairer, much simpler, and much more efficient way to fund the government, the FAIRtax. The FAIRtax doesn't pick winners and losers. Because it taxes spending, not earnings, the FAIRtax lets everyone save for their retirement tax-free. The FAIRtax collects the revenue the federal government needs to operate, but does so in a way that has the least impact on our individual freedom and the least adverse impact on our economic prosperity. With the FAIRtax, there are no tax returns to file, no records to keep. We pay our federal taxes when we make retail purchases of new goods and services. And with the FAIRtax, there is no need for the IRS. If you sell a used couch or a used jet ski online, there's no FAIRtax due on that transaction. The FAIRtax will allow us to take back control. The income payroll tax system is broken. It's no longer working. We can't repair it, but we can replace it with the FAIRtax. So join us and take back control of our country and our lives, not with bullets, but with the elimination of one of the biggest threats to our liberty and economic prosperity, the income payroll tax. We should all remember Edmund Burke's warning that applies to our efforts to take back control. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. We should also remember this quote from George Orwell's 1984, which, if we do nothing, may foretell your and your children's future. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. So what can each of us do? We can write letters and make calls to our elected representatives and attend Zoom town hall meetings demanding that if they really want to allow Americans to take back control, the first step is to eliminate the income payroll tax system and enact the FAIRtax. Take back control. Help us pass the FAIRtax. Help us bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. If you can make larger contributions, investments, they will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but will be used for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for our future years. Please go to FAIRtax.org and invest in Americans for Fair Taxation. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the FAIRtax and learn why the FAIRtax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.